Good afternoon, CBC. I am so glad to be with you on this Wednesday afternoon. We have been working really hard as a staff to prepare for the reopening this Sunday. I am so thankful, first of all, for the last two Sundays. We've had some people joining us, just a small group. We've been testing out to make sure that we're able to stay safe, that we're practicing social distancing, that we've got our building safely prepared for you. And as we do that, I know that as we gather, it will be joyful. It'll be different, but it'll be joyful. And so, would you pray that the Lord would bless this Sunday as we gather together, as we worship Him? And would you pray for our elders as we meet tonight on the phone? We're just going to talk through what reopening looks like, and we want to do that effectively and well. Pray for unity of heart and purpose so that our service might be a blessing to you and to the Lord. Today I want to take a look at Psalm 90. And Psalm 90 is the beginning of Book 4. We have gone through first the introduction of the Psalms, Psalm 1 and 2, the blessed life, the blessed man. We've seen what that blessed life looks like. It's the one who abides in the Lord's word, His Torah, His instruction. And we see how the nations rage and peoples plot in vain, Psalm 2, against the Lord and His anointed. I don't know about you, but these have been pretty tumultuous days. I've found that between the COVID pandemic, crossing my words there, the COVID pandemic, the shutting down of our economy, the racial tensions that have gone on, now just watching and seeing some of the things that are going on, the riots, protests, the tearing down of statues, regardless of whether they're slaveholders or those who fought against slavery. It's been quite shocking actually to watch what has been happening in the United States, and suddenly it feels like the entire world is being turned upside down. And just in a matter of months, we've gone from having this stable and secure world that we thought there was a rootedness to it to everything being toppled and turned over. It's been troubling for me. I do have to admit, watching statues of people who fought against slavery being torn down, and seeing statues of in Wisconsin, for example, last night, a statue of one of the first women who fought for the right for women to vote. That statue was torn down, and it looks senseless. It looks pointless, and it's hard to even fathom what's going on. And when I look at Psalm 90, and when I think about what this psalm is about, it's been good for me today to read through it, to study it, to remember it. And here's why. I need this psalm just as these days are difficult. I need this psalm, and I trust that you will find it a blessing too. Psalm 89, we've seen this over and over, but let me recap. Psalm 89, it ends with this psalm of devastation. Psalm 88, the darkest psalm in the Bible. Psalm 89, it says in verse 44, Psalm 89, 46, sorry. How long, O Lord, will you hide yourself forever? How long will your wrath burn like fire? Remember how short my time is, for what vanity you have created, all the children of man. What man can live and never see death? Who can deliver his soul from the power of Sheol? Lord, where is your steadfast love of old, by which your faithfulness you swore to David? Remember, O Lord, how your servants are mocked, and how I bear in my heart the insults of all the many nations, with which your enemies mock, O Lord, with which they mock the footsteps of your anointed. Do you hear the echoes of Psalm 2? The nations rage, the peoples plot in vain against the Lord and against his anointed. I don't know about you, but in these days, it appears as though some of the very fundamental pieces of Western civilization are being torn down, and that what we have known as a nation, as basically both as Canadians and Americans, It's so hard to even comprehend. And I'm not casting a judgment today on the rightness or the wrongness of peaceful protests, but when I see actions by so many who are lawless and who are functioning in ways that are really destructive, it looks a lot like, well, I think of my time that I spent in Russia and how Marxism had influenced Russia, and it was seeking to destabilize and destroy and to tear down the foundations of a society. And the result of that was was chaos for Russia for decades. And that can be troubling to us. But when we come to Psalm 90, there is this great psalm, and we're told that it's a psalm of Moses, the man of God. And that phrase in the introduction, a prayer of Moses, the man of God, echoes back to Deuteronomy 33, verse 1, where Moses is also called the man of God. And he was speaking to Israel just as they were to enter into the promised land. They had spent 40 years in the wilderness, now just about to go into the promised land. And Moses says to them, Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or you had formed the earth and the world from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. And here is the language of creation, this language of God creating mountains, God creating the earth, forming the earth. And in Deuteronomy 32, verse 18, Moses uses the same type of language about Israel, how they had been formed or birthed by God. And yet, in the midst of this, Moses also says in Psalm 90, verse 13, have compassion or have pity on your servants. And this is the same language again that Moses uses in Deuteronomy 32, verse 36. Lord, have compassion upon your servants. So in the midst of economic devastation, in the midst of terror and looting and destruction, Moses looks and he sees the God who has formed the world, the God who has created Israel, and he sees the God who is gracious and compassionate. But there's more to it than just that. God has been gracious and compassionate. And this language of the Lord being gracious and compassionate, actually, it shows up in verse 13 where it says, Return, O Lord, how long? Have compassion on your servants, or have pity. And there is this language there that echoes what Moses says in Exodus 32, verse 12, where Moses asks the Lord, would you turn, would you relent from your anger? And this psalm speaks of that. It talks about turning from your wrath. We are brought to an end by your anger. By your wrath we are dismayed. You've set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your presence. Psalm 90, verses 7 and 8. After the crown, after the throne of David, after the rule of Israel, after the people of God had lost their prominence and their position, there was this cry in Psalm 89, have you forgotten us? Have you forgotten your servant David? Have you rejected and cast down his crown into the dust? And the answer is Psalm 90. Now, I've often done this psalm at funerals. It's an incredibly comforting psalm in the midst of some very troubling words in it. It talks about that we have 70, maybe 80 years of life, and that all of our days pass away as under a sigh. They're trouble. And this reflects Israel's experience, and it reflects, I think, the experience of so many people who have experienced such enormous trouble and difficulty. And in this psalm, Psalm 90, there is this incredible comfort that death may sweep away generations, but from everlasting to everlasting you are God. Now that's a comfort for us, because we can experience the turmoil and trials and difficulties of our age right now, and we can realize that it feels very, very tumultuous to us. And yet, God is a constant. These things have been going on. History has had its ebbs and flows. Nations have raged. Peoples have plotted against the Lord and against his anointed. They hold to beliefs that are absolutely contrary to what God says is a way of life and flourishing. Our world is consistently pivoting towards the culture of death. And yet, in every generation, from everlasting to everlasting, we have a God who has remained constant. And so here is this echo from Psalm 90. Psalm 90, verse 14. It says, "Satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love, that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, and as for as many years as we have seen evil. Let your work be shown to your servants, and your glorious power to their children. Let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us, and establish the work of our hands." So, what Moses says here was used by Israel, that even if they were to go into exile, even if the crown was thrown into the dust, even if Israel lost its prominence, that does not mean that God has abandoned them. Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. And so there's a confidence. God is always our refuge, regardless of what goes on in the world. The second thing is, we can be satisfied in the morning with the steadfast love of the Lord. Though nations rage, though kingdoms totter and topple, though civilizations come and go, God is everlasting, from everlasting to everlasting, and that means that we can find our satisfaction in him, that he is a steadfast and sure and secure rock. In fact, this language that God is our rock has been something that we've seen throughout the Psalms, that God is our rock. He is our steadfastness. He is our surety. He is our stability. And not only can we know that God is our dwelling place, and not only know that God is the one who can satisfy us with his steadfast love, it also says that we can sing for joy. Now, here we are. We can sing not because of what the circumstances of life are, but because of who God is. A constant and faithful God, a gracious and compassionate God, a steadfast God, a God from everlasting to everlasting, a God who is our dwelling place. Now, that's something to worship. Though the mountains, this was the verse that Melanie and I used at our wedding, though the mountains give way and they give way into the sea, yet the Lord's covenant is unchanging. It's a rock, it's a surety that comes from, I can't remember, I think it's Isaiah 54. But it's this promise that God is the constant. And because God is a constant, he has been a constant always and forever will be. That means that his steadfast love, his love is not something that is measured by how well we are doing, how well we are economically, how comfortable we are in our country. What is the steadfast love of the Lord? That regardless of the circumstances around us, he will never abandon a people who cry out to him, and he loves to show mercy. Which is why Moses can say, "Return, O Lord," or "Turn to us, O Lord." Relent. There's this idea of relent, have pity. Don't let your anger continue. Because the Lord's anger is something that has to be kindled. It's something that has to be provoked. Where his mercy is what naturally flows from him. He's not a God who just blows up unexpectedly, but rather he is a God of steadfast mercy and love. And that's been good news for me in these days. That's been something I've reminded myself. God is my steadfast, my constant refuge and rock. And that when I come to him, what I can expect is like the prodigal son in Luke 15, who comes home and he's expecting that he's going to have to grovel and plead for mercy and hope that his father will take him back in, and maybe take him back in not as a son, but as a servant. And what does the father do in Luke 15? He welcomes his son with open arms. He doesn't let his son finish his speech. He says, fatten the calf, slaughter the fattened calf, and put a robe on my son and a ring on his finger, and all these privileges of sonship. He restores to his son because the father heart of God is one that is full of mercy when his children come to him. So after the devastation of Psalm 89, where there are international enemies destroying Jerusalem, the crown being cast down to the dust, the thought of Israel going into perpetual exile, there is still joy in the Lord. There is still this ability to say, satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love. There is still this intimacy that God is our dwelling place. And so today, in the midst of a world and a day where things are tumultuous and topsy-turvy and changing, can you reflect on the very consistent nature of our God? Find that he is your refuge and your strength, your very present help in time of trouble. That even though generations come and go and civilizations rise up and fall, God is our constant, and we turn to him for everlasting joy. So I thank you for watching today. I hope that you find great joy in the Lord. Just a reminder, if you're thinking about coming on Sunday, I'd ask that you go to our webpage, cbcelderton.ca. You can register for either the 9 o'clock or the 11 o'clock service. We're not expecting both of those to be filled this week. We're expecting that it's going to take some time as people return. We're going to do this safely. We're going to do it well. But I'm looking forward to seeing those of you who are able to be able to worship with us. See you on Sunday. And if not, we will continue to live stream, except not at 10:30, but at 11 o'clock. So until then, God bless you and have a great week. Enjoy the Lord.